What's going on, Lion fans? Welcome to the Pride Detroit YouTube channel. I'm Miko, joined once again by my guy Morgan, and we have special guest Hamza here because if you've seen the title of this video, you know we're talking about kickers. We're talking about a specific kicker. So, what better time than to bring Hamza off the bench to talk about the one aspect of football that he is most knowledgeable about? He knows a lot about football, but let's be honest. When it comes down to kickers, I don't think anybody on the staff knows as much as Hamza or cares as much as Hamza does. So, Hamza, really glad that you took out the time to join us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So obviously the news, the talk around the town, which clearly illustrates that we're clearly in the offseason, is that the Lions signed another kicker onto the roster, signing Jake Bates, formerly of the Michigan Panthers, and really a guy that was making waves in the UFL, and a person that, let's be honest, guys, a lot of Lions fans, a lot of fans in the state were kind of hoping that once he became available, that the Lions would at least make an offer. They did. Jake Bates had offers from other teams, and he decided to stay in the Mitten State, staying here in Michigan, signing with the Detroit Lions. So before we get too deep into the conversation, Hamza, I'm going to kick it over to you first. Just when, how much do you know about Jake Bates, and kind of can you kind of give us an illustration or a path of like how he ended up in the UFL in the first place, doing some of the things that he was doing this year?
Yeah, I mean, I know the recent history better than the older history, but from my knowledge, I mean, he started out playing soccer, ended up in college, ending up as a kickoff specialist, bounced around a couple schools, finished at Arkansas, where he had his most prominent season as a kickoff specialist. Never really kicked any field goals in college, and then he was bouncing around those free agent camps, just trying to get a tryout, just like a lot of guys who did have field goals in college, and somehow, some way, ended up in the UFL, got his shot, and the rest is history. Week one, he hit that 64-yard field goal, and all eyes were on Jake Bates.
It's kind of crazy to hear that kind of story about a kicker, Morgan. Like most kickers, like to Hamza's point, there are kickers that do go throughout college and maybe don't get as many field goal attempts as others, but maybe find a way to start impressing in a camp. For a guy like Jake Bates to kind of go under the radar like this is a little odd, don't you think?
Morgan, you're muted.
Good. We can rip that. All right. So yeah, so it really speaks to the novelty of kickers, right? Like we were talking about it before we hopped on. It's really tough to evaluate, man, because these guys can have they can drill things in practice, and I'm sure Hamza can expound more on this. There's probably been a lot of really good practice kickers out there that can nail it when nobody's watching or they're in the indoor facility, but shoot, if you put them in front of 70,000 people and millions and millions watching at home, all of a sudden the game changes a little bit. So I'll be interested to see how he performs once the pressure is a little more on, because I would say me and Jeremy went and saw him kicked. We went and saw one of those Michigan Panthers games, and we saw him. I think he missed the only kick he attempted, though. To be honest, we were like, dang.
Mm-hmm.
So, but kickers aren't perfect, but yeah, I don't really know how he went under the radar. Maybe Hamza can speak about that more, but I feel like that's a lot of these kickers just kind of pop up and you're like, oh, you're awesome. Where'd you come from?
Yeah. Hamza, I mean, I'll ask you the same question. Yeah. How does something like this happen?
I mean, the biggest gap is just, you have how many collegiate kickers graduating every year between first string, second string across, dozens, if not over 100 Power 5, large schools. And, that starts with, hey, did you make your mark in college? Were you on someone's radar? You have guys who, performed well in college, who had a large sample size of field goals, who just don't pan out in the NFL, who don't even get much of a tryout in the NFL. So, I mean, the biggest gap there is, if you don't have college tape, it's not happening. No amount of, free agent combines and tryouts and workouts are going to replace, having live game tape. That goes for, think about Colin Kaepernick, for example, as he was trying to get back into the league. He does all these high profile workouts. What's the number one knock on him? It's well, we haven't seen him in pads. We haven't seen him against a real defense. It's the same goes for a kicker. And you only have so many reps. It's very hard to contextualize. And so there's really is a premium placed on those college reps. And Jake Bates simply didn't have that. So, it's very easy for him to fly under the radar. He's just one of dozens, if not hundreds, in any given draft year to come out who have the potential.
That's a really good point, because I think that leads us into he did actually was able to do that in the UFL this year, right? Like he was able to be in game situations, was able to put together a nice collection of high profile moments, whether it's 64-yard kicks or just being consistent, from other parts of the field. So with that said, Morgan, I'll start with you. Actually, I'll start with Hamza because Hamza, when you look at Jake Bates and you look at what he was able to accomplish in the UFL, what impresses you most about him as a kicker?
I mean, come on, we all know the answer to this. The same reason he got on our radar, it's that leg. I don't want to make him a one-dimensional kicker, though, right? He went 11 of 12 inside of 50 this year. The only miss was the one, Morgan, we were sitting together and Jeremy got on his phone to record it, and Jeremy jinxed it, as he should. But
you were there, Hamza. I forgot you were there too. Yeah, we did see that together. Yep, and Hamza's lovely mother.
Yeah,
shout out to Mrs. Bakush.
My mom. We love you. But I mean, Jake Bates has a huge leg. He also is, good inside of 50 as well, similar to Michael Badgley. I want to go back to something Jeremy pointed out earlier, which was an offseason quote from Dave Phipp, where he was talking about the competition last year with Riley Patterson, Badgley, and John Parker Romo, and they cut John Parker Romo. And Dave Phipp specifically mentioned the kind of type or archetype of kicker that they're looking for. And so if they kept Badgley and they got rid of James Turner today or yesterday, that means that, they kept Bates. That means that Bates fits this type. They envision Bates through his workout that he had and through whatever other film they've seen of him being consistent inside of 50. And like we said, he went 11 of 12. So, as much as we focus on he can hit a 64-yarder, he has to be really good inside of 50 for the Lions to be putting him in serious consideration here.
I was going to say, because those 64-yarders, Morgan, are going to be a dime a dozen, right? We know how Dan Campbell operates as a head coach. He will sooner fake it on fourth down before he decides that he's going to go for a 64-yard field goal, right?
Yeah, and if you're in a desperate, that's the only, it's a last second try to win the game. Then sure, let's see if he can hit it. But yeah, to your point, Miko, I don't really ever see Dan Campbell being you know what, I'm going to trust my kicker over my high powered offense. But to Hamza's point, I'll let you do the comp that you brought up earlier, because that was I was oh dang, because in my opinion, what I want as a fan and someone who covers the team now and writes, all that. I want someone that we can consistently trust, 48 and under. And when I said that before we jumped on the show, Hamza's like, Morgan, raise the bar. And I was like, man, I'm scarred, right? It's been tough a little bit since Prater left. And then we were babied by having Jason Hansen for 2 decades. That was my entire childhood, was having Jason, in young adulthood, to be honest with you. So, but yeah, go ahead, Hamza.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we all see his leg first and foremost, and we're coming off the era of Matt Prater where we were spoiled with that for so long. But I honestly think, as far as comps go, that most people will be familiar with, that Jake Bates is more similar to Jason Hansen than to Matt Prater. I mean, he's consistent inside of 50. He can hit that above 50. Obviously, he has a longer range. Jason Hansen never hitting from 64 with clearance. But there were also plenty of misses from Jake Bates above 50. I mean, he missed, 5 times this season? 4 of those were above 50. So he's not cash money. And that's kind of on the mark where Jason Hansen was. I think he was a career 45-50% from above 50. And also things that don't pop on the stat sheet. Week 3 or week 4 of the UFL season, Jake Bates had some game winner. I forget how long it was, but it was a game winner as time expired. He missed it, shanked it pretty badly. There was some flag on the defense, so he got to redo it. He hit it. Legacy continues. No one bats an eye because it's not in the highlights. It's not in the stat sheet. But that's something to consider, right? The numbers don't always tell the full story, and he's not going to be perfect every time you line him up outside of 60. I don't think he's a Matt Prater, right? Matt Prater, anything inside of maybe 58 was fairly automatic. That's not going to be the case with Jake Bates. So he's sort of more of a middle ground there.
And so I think so would you kind of illustrate that as a weakness of his, is that again, as big as that leg is for him, it isn't always as consistent as maybe fans think it is based off of highlights?
Yeah, for sure. And that's part of why, maybe he wasn't on NFL radars before. That's part of why he's in the UFL, right? And part of why he has significantly less guaranteed money than a guy like Michael Badgley, right? I know we'll touch on this later, but I feel very firmly that it's Badgley's job to lose, right? 2-year contract or not, the Lions know Jake Bates is unproven. He comes from a small sample size. different circumstances, like you talked about, the pressure, the crowd, etc. So he's going to have to do a lot to prove himself. And, he's proven himself to an extent in the UFL. He has to continue that and build on it some.
Yeah, so I mean, let's go ahead and go in that direction then, because we're already started down that path. Morgan, how do you see these two kickers kind of comparing to one another when you look at, again, the small sample size that Jake Bates has in the NFL versus what Michael Badgley has been able to do for the Lions at least the last 2 seasons?
I think this is one place I think Campbell, and tell me what you think, Hamza, like where I think Campbell and the Lions as a franchise will be cautious, which is not their normal MO. But for kickers, I think, in my opinion, or at least I hope that maybe this is wishful thinking, but I hope they're just wanting more of a sure thing. Maybe Bates outperforms Badgley slightly in the 55 plus categories, over the duration of camp. But if Badgley holds a decent leg up from 50 and under, I think that's where I think they'll side with Badgley, just because we know how this coaching staff likes to operate. They trust their offense, and a lot of 4th and shorts, they're going to keep the offense on the field. And it really, the effects of having bad kicking didn't really resonate with me as a fan or just a student of the game until we had bad kicking, because you miss those long attempts and you're like, dang, man, now they got the ball where? You know what I mean? That's not good. So, and it really, it took us, through the end of the Caldwell era into the Patricia era of not, sometimes not having good kickers for a little bit there, when Prater wasn't involved, and you start to see, you're like, dang, yeah, we don't want to do this. Rather just maybe go for it. Try our luck.
Yeah, I've always been of that mindset. People don't complain about going for it on 4th down until it doesn't work. And I think the same thing is true with your kicker, right? No one complains about their kicker until they miss what they believe to be a gimme, right? Whether that's 53 or 55 or inside of the 40 or inside the 30, no one's complaining about your kicker. No one's thinking about your kicker until they miss a kick. And now all of a sudden everyone becomes an expert into, hey, this kicker would be so much better than this kicker. No. And so I think that's a really interesting thing. But Hamza, I'm going to throw the same question to you. When you compare these two kickers, you were kind of already saying you have Badgley having a leg up. What is it about Michael Badgley that has you that confident in him?
I mean, the Lions made this mistake once already, right? They sent him packing and they brought in 2 other kickers, and they couldn't live with their own failure. Where did it bring them? Back to Michael Badgley. So help me God if they make that mistake again. He's a good quality kicker, and we can talk all we want about, it's going to cost a game when the Lions have to kick from 59 and Badgley comes up short. That might happen once a season. In reality, at most, maybe twice in an anomaly. What about the game where your kicker goes 1 of 3 inside of 40 because he's having an off day? The Mason Crosby game, take that for example. Crosby, what was that day he missed 4 or 5 field goals in Ford Field, and how many kickers have we seen do that inside of Ford Field? Shout out to Audible Dong. You think about that, I need that long leg for a game-winning field goal, until what about the shorter field goals? It comes at a cost. Badgley's good at what he does, and yeah, he's not perfect, but he's going to get you, 90, 92% inside of 40, inside of 45. That's a lot more than anyone else will get you there. Jake Bates is going to have to be at least as good as Badgley inside of the 45 range in order for the Lions and Dan Campbell to even think about what he brings beyond 50.
And I love the way Hamza put that. Go you first, Miko.
Oh yeah, no, I was gonna say I just wanted to piggyback off of that, in another respect. Again, going back to this whole idea that people put so much pressure on 4th down calls or kickers whenever they're in these high pressure situations, and not, again, being a smarter fan to put more emphasis on the rest of your team. If you have to settle for a 64-yard field goal, or if you need to attempt a 64-yard field goal to win a game, there are other aspects of that game that have seriously gone wrong, right? Whether it's on the offense, defensive side, or coaching, something else has gone wrong, and we have now just been put into a position where we are putting all of this weight on a kicker who, yes, has a job. This is what they're paid to do. But we also have to kind of remember that the totality of an entire game does not come down to just one single player. So I do think, again, trying to get fans to understand that even if Jake Bates does end up being the starting kicker for the Detroit Lions, we should not be hanging all hope on this idea that like, oh, no matter what the Lions do from kickoff to the end of the game, as long as we have Jake Bates, we can win this. Like, you should still expect your offense and Jared Goff to play at a high level. You should still expect Aiden Hutchinson and that defense to play at a high level. Dan Campbell still has to coach a good game. It's still an entire team effort, which is something that I think we can all agree that that's what the Lions preach and believe as a foundation piece to this team in the first place.
Yeah, I love that point, Miko. Like, because to piggyback off you, like, yes, Dan Campbell would 100% say that. Like, if Jake Bates misses a 63-yarder at the buzzer and we lose, like the Lions lose a game, like he's gonna be like, well, we shouldn't have been there in the first place. This, that, and the other. It's all complementary football, like, right? Special teams, offense, defense, it all plays a part. And I'm 100% with Hamza's line of thinking, and I hope that's how the Lions are approaching it in terms of having somebody who's just going to be like 90-something% under 40-ish yards. You know, that's what I want, because you want to be able to get some points out of like a good drive. You know, that's how you win some of these close games. Some of these games, the Lions should be winning 10, 14, 17 points like they did last year when they beat some teams down. They're like, yeah, go ahead and sit down, Jack. We're good, brother. Like, you can go kick it. But like, yeah, so that's how I look at it. And go ahead, Hamza. I wanted you to get this point off.
Yeah, there's one thing that I had to circle back on, because I don't want to just speak in theory. If you go back to 2013, 2014, when the Lions had those kicking issues and they cycled through how many of them, you look at like week 4 or 5 at home against the Bills. I think it was the game some dude got arrested for pointing a laser beam in Dan Carpenter's eyes, the Bills kicker. But the Lions lost.
That was when Jim Schwartz got carried off the field too. Go on.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Lions lost that game 13-12 or 14-13. They were 0 for 3 on kicks that day. If the Lions win that game, that's the difference between them having a home playoff game against the Seahawks against the Giants instead of going on the road against the Seahawks. Probably changes the rest of the Jim Caldwell trajectory, right? So, we say in theory, we don't take it for granted making inside of 50, but like, that's one of those things where you never know where it adds up, right? Is it worth having your 159, 60-yard field goal that has a 60% chance of going in once a year, or having, 5 or 6 games that you win by 2 points, by 3 points, by 1 point, because your kicker was consistent inside of 40? And, that's not always the case. We have very high expectations because we've been spoiled for the last 30 years. Not everyone's going to be Jason Hansen. Not everyone's going to be Matt Prater. And I think a lot of people are just looking for that. And everyone who's not that falls short of their expectations. You have to understand, not all 32 teams get to have an elite player at that position. So, you take
that part, all that.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very well said. So last question that we have before we get out of here. Obviously, training camp kicks off at the end of July. I think the training camp schedule actually just got released today. So I think veterans have to report on the 23rd of July. So leading into or looking towards training camp, I think we kind of already know the answer for everybody here. But Morgan, like, who do you see being the favorite as of right now to win that starting job for the Lions at the kicker position?
I gotta go with my man, Michael Badgley. I'm a loyal dude, man. Like, when he hit that kick against the Rams, I'd go to war for that man now. He'd be like, hey, Morgan, I need a little bit of help, like sacking a small town in a weird country. I'd be like, all right, I'm with you, bro. You hit that kick against the Rams, so whatever you need for at least a little while. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Badgley.
Yeah, I think it's Badgley's job to lose. I think it's close. What concerns me is just the small sample size. Like we said, I think it was 12 kicks inside of 50 that we saw from Jake Bates. Obviously, the Lions saw enough in a workout to sign him to a 2-year deal. We're going to see a lot larger sample size over the course of training camp, and should be interesting. But I think it's Badgley's job to lose. Jake Bates has to be at least as good as Michael Badgley inside of 45 or 50 to be in consideration for this.
Man, do I want to say Michael Badgley so bad. But I want to also be the lone wolf, and I'm going to say Jake Bates. And I'm just going to say Jake Bates because I do think he's going to be just what you're saying, Hamza, right? I think he'll be just as consistent for the Lions, at least in the scenarios that they try to put him in, because we know that's what the Lions love to do when they're having their training camp practices, is they love to put these kickers in these various different scenarios and see how they perform. And I do think this is an opportunity for him to showcase that he can be consistent in those moments. And then obviously they know that he has this cannon of a leg. But like you said, he also does have a short resume, but it's a short resume to show that, like, you know what, he can still do things inside of 50 as well. So I think one of the other big things, and that it kind of does lead into what you were saying, Hamza, as far as having enough opportunities. It's going to be interesting to see how many opportunities he has in the preseason, right? Like how frequently is this offense moving to give him opportunities, or is it just a bunch of touchdowns and he's just kicking extra points? If he gets a few more opportunities to kick field goals, especially in Ford Field, then I think that could also be a really big deciding factor in who walks away with the starting position.
Yeah, and I'd be shocked if it wasn't every preseason field goal goes to him. You know what you have in Michael Badgley at this point. There should be no preseason reps wasted on him.
That's a great point. Because
that's a really good point.
No kick is going to feel like, I know I keep saying it, but that kick he hit against the Rams, like that cemented so much to me, man. That was a 54-yarder with the weight, like the pain and like suffering of a zillion Lions fans on your shoulders in the moment. So yeah, kudos, because that was huge. So I love that point. Yeah, go ahead and let Bates see what he does in the preseason and go from there.
I'm going to throw in a bonus question here, Hamza, really quick. Is there any possibility that he could that Jack Fox should be like worried about his kickoff responsibilities, or is that like signed, sealed, delivered?
What do you mean by worried?
Like that, like even if like that Bates, because I mean obviously like we kind of talked about in the beginning, it's like Jake Bates kind of made his career kicking like on kickoff.
Yeah.
So I mean obviously with there being new kickoff rules, do you think there could be do you think the Lions could be experimenting even there with like seeing how Jake Bates does on kickoff responsibilities?
I think that's definitely worth considering. I mean, anything before this year, as far as being a kickoff specialist, meant you have a huge leg. Jack Fox has a huge leg. Jake Bates has a huge leg, right? So, anything beyond that, I can't tell you how precise they are at getting a high ball versus a line drive or anything like that. But, everything counts, right? If that's something where Jack Fox excels and he transitions well to the new format, then probably means less consideration. If you show up and hey, Jack Fox sucks at putting touch on his kickoff balls, then suddenly that's a factor, right? That's something you have to consider. That's going to be a play that matters a lot, because the NFL is doing this for a reason, so that we get more returns, and it's an explosive play. So we'll see how that plays out.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation on kickers, because, obviously we don't get to have it often, but I think this was a really good conversation. Hamza, I appreciate you bringing so much insight to this conversation, because Lord knows Morgan and I would have been a little lost if we had to do this by ourselves.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure.
But like always, guys, so if you're looking for any more content, any more insight on Jake Bates, any more insight on the Lions as a whole, you can always head over to prideofdetroit.com. We're always uploading brand new articles over there so that you can constantly stay in tune with this team. Also, if you want to be caught up with all the videos over here on the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel, all you have to do is hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and that'll make sure that you get notified every time we upload a brand new article over here on the YouTube channel. So with all that said, I'm Miko, he's Morgan, he's Hamza. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and we'll be sure to catch you guys in the next one.